Thought I'd show you a really cool little technique using cling film. Now it's just your regular plastic wrap type stuff, the kind of thing you'd use to wrap up your sandwiches. Now use that and a mist bottle, and I'll bring it all together at the end with a brush for a few hard edges. And so I tear off quite a large piece of the cling film, roll it up into a ball, roll it out quite tight, and then I like to open it up again as much as possible. You don't have to open it all the way, just loosen it up, then scrunch it all up again into a loose ball. It's like hundreds or thousands of tiny little dents and little marks in there, and that's what creates the effect. So then I'll bring in some water over the whole sheet, quite a lot, with the mist bottle, so in random places really, so there'll be a few little dry areas and some wet areas as well. And now I'm going to paint a woodland scene, so I'll grab a little bit of blue, some cobalt, mix that in with what's in the palette there, touch a little bit of ultramarine in there. Now this is a similar technique to using a sponge or any other thing that you can use to make little printed marks, but I'll scrunch up the cling film into quite a tight ball there, and then pick up some paint and I can dab that on, and it makes lots of random little marks. And I can bring that in, and now this is going to be the distance, so I put it in blue, and then moving the ball of cling film around, dabbing it around randomly, changing the angle of my hand as well, so I get lots of different marks. I'm not making the same mark twice. So let's get a little bit of raw sienna now, mix that in with just some of the paint that's in the palette already. And now I can lay that in around and over the top. And so the idea is I'm building up all of the foliage shapes in the trees with the cling film. Let's touch a little bit of light red into that mixture as well. So varying the mixture all the time, trying to create some very soft, subtle autumn colours. It's a very loose, very easy way of working. You have to keep an eye on how much water you've got in your paint and on the paper, but that's pretty much the only thing you have to think about really. You don't want it too wet so it runs away, you don't want it too dry that the marks are too hard and don't blend together at all. So you need to practice a little bit, play around till you get a feel for the amount of water that you need. So I varied that mixture again with a little bit more raw sienna. Let's drag some of that dark paint that's just sitting there in the palette. I can bring some of that in. Now again, laying over the top, allowing the paint to run together and blur. I want to create quite a soft, slightly misty feel, light coming down through the trees. Let's grab a little bit more blue paint, lay that in over towards this left hand side. Now the paper's dried out a little bit over there, so tiny little spritz there with the mist bottle. Let's go back into some raw sienna, a little bit of light red. And now bring that in over the top of that blue, blending it all together. So I'm kind of using the cling film to make the marks, also to blend as I go. Let's drag all of that paint out of the palette there, getting a little bit darker towards this left hand side. And so I'm working my way around, fairly slowly, building up little layers, lots of variation in the colour. Let's mix up some red and everything in the palette there, so it's getting a little bit darker, a little bit grayer. So that can act as some shadow colours in these trees. Now as I come down, further down, I want to leave behind a few slightly harder edges, but not necessarily around the edge of the painting. So bring in some water around the edge of the paper, and then I'll leave a few little hard marks, or little white areas I should say, down towards the bottom, more in the middle. So bringing these shapes around, I'm still moving the cling film around, bringing the colour in all over, so tying all the areas together. There's no need to rush when you're doing this kind of thing. If the paper starts drying out a little bit, you can always give it a tiny little spray with a mist bottle just to keep that level of moisture there. So let's grab a little bit more red paint, light red again. Now turn the cling film over, expose a clean bit. And now I can bring some of that down across the floor of the woodland, and leaving a couple of those little hard areas just down there in the middle. And that's going to hopefully act as some light, catching little leaves and twigs and things down there. Don't need to leave too many of those behind, it could make it look too busy, but just a few really helps to create that illusion of light shining down. Now again, a little bit more blue into that mixture, so I made it grey again. It's a warm grey. I can bring that down across the woodland floor. So slowly building up all these layers. Let's get a little bit more ultramarine, more light red again. So look slightly cooler grey this time. So putting warms and next to cools, lights next to darks. Bring that all the way down. So the areas on the left and the right quite soft and in shadow. I can drag that across with the cling film as well, just to fill that area up. Again, tiny little mist with the spray bottle. So more ultramarine light red, a little bit darker this time. Grab a little bit of everything in the palette as well. Now I can lay back in to these trees and get some slightly darker areas in there now. So building up areas of shadow, and again putting darks next to lights always helps to make the light stand out a little bit more. So the majority of this painting is done in one go without drying. I'll get as much down as I can before I dry it off. So really building up that sense of distance, light, dark and shadow. And now I'll pick up a brush. I've got a calligraphy brush. It's just a small, cheap calligraphy brush, nothing special. And let's mix a bit of cobalt in with some of that grey in the palette. And I can start suggesting a few tree trunks that are a little bit further away, and so building up the sense of depth by putting these in a blue grey. Now the paper's still slightly damp, so this will soften a little bit. So making these shapes fairly random. I haven't got a reference for this. I'm working from instinct. I've painted this kind of thing several times before, so I know pretty much where I want to go with it. Let's bring in a tiniest little spray again with the mist bottle. So I want all these shapes to be fairly soft, and then the only real hard dark areas are going to be a couple of tree trunks. So looking around and trying to create a balance in these shapes. Don't want anything standing out on its own too much, but really it's bringing in some of these vertical marks with the calligraphy brush just to create that illusion and the sense of there being quite a lot of tree trunks off into the distance, and it all helps to with the perspective and also builds up that illusion of detail without really having to do too much. So but just by adding these few little tree trunks, the scene's starting to take shape already. You can now see that it's definitely a woodland scene. So dragging in lots of random little marks there with a calligraphy brush. Building the impression that there's lots of trees, lots of little branches and twigs and all kinds of things going on there really. So let's pick up some more paint, a little bit more light red. Let's get a bit of raw sienna in there. And back into the cling film, so fold it over again, let's find a clean bit. And now the paper's dried off a tiny little bit now, so I can start laying back over the top. And these marks will go on a little bit harder. And that instantly brings these areas closer and pushes that distance away by having the mixture of soft and hard edges. So again, working my way over the whole piece of paper and starting to bring it all together now. With these slightly harder edges, nice warm autumn colours as well. Let's get a little bit more of that light red. Let's make it a tiny bit darker. And I can start building up a sense of lots of little shrubs and little bushes and things like that. Let's go even darker now. Let's get a little bit of blue in there, ultramarine, more light red. So I'm coming over into the shadow areas now, and it can be that little bit darker. So just having a little look, working my way around, seeing where I need to add a little bit of shape, a little bit of texture. Let's grab some of that dark paint that's sitting down there on the palette, bring that right down into the foreground. Now really building up these layers and creating that sense of perspective and depth. And like I said at the start, it's just quite similar to working with a sponge, and I've demonstrated that before. But it's quite nice using cling film because it's not as absorbent, or it's not absorbent at all really. So the marks you make are all about the paint that just sticks to the outside edge. of that cling film. And it's similar technique, but there are definite differences, and if you try it yourself, you'll see the difference. But anyway, back into the calligraphy brush, and now I'm going to drag in some tree trunks, quite dark, and that's really going to bring this foreground closer now and hopefully push that distance away. We're really going to build up a sense of perspective now. So I can drag that in, allowing some of the edges to break up. I don't want it to be too straight a line or too hard an edge. So little broken edges all the way around the side of this tree, dragging in some branches as well. Let's bring this tree all the way up to the top. Let's drag in some of that slightly redder paint and very lightly drag in some branches. Have some going up, have a few facing slightly downwards as well. So again, a lot of variation in the shapes and the direction of the branches. It's always a bit of a mistake I see quite a lot of people make when painting trees, is they'll have the branches all going off in the same direction, all the same shape. And if you look at a tree, they very rarely do that. So get as much variation in there as you can. And now fill in little gaps, very lightly dragging in a few vertical marks for suggestion of some trees a little bit further away. So again, always thinking about perspective. Now let's have a large tree going up here on the right hand side. So start out with some raw sienna and try and create the impression that this tree is catching a bit of light. So drag in raw sienna to start off with, and then I can go over it with some darker paint, but leaving behind that little area of raw sienna. Let's see if we can make this tree look like it's leaning away from us slightly, so I can get that effect by making it a tiny little bit thinner at the top and a little bit darker, thicker, towards the base. And that creates that impression, really, that it's going away from us ever so slightly. Trees, more often than not, are the same thickness at the top as they are at the bottom, so the same sort of width. So you can think of it as you would anything else when you're working in perspective, is that the further away from you it is, the thinner it will appear. But again, flicking out a few branches now, some going up, some horizontal, some coming down slightly. And so very loosely, just flicking around with the brush, making little marks. And they always look slightly better, broken lines, little bits of lost and found. A lot of the time, really, you only want a couple of definite hard edges in a painting like this. You can allow everything else to be quite vague and kind of almost joining together, weaving in and out. Let's pop in a little bit of dark paint on the right hand side of this tree. Really try and push that light effect. Okay, we're getting there. I think I need to do a few more marks with the cling film. So some more ultramarine, light red. I can mix up quite a strong dark with these two. So let's get some real strong dark down in this foreground. Really try and push that light. Can use that as well to get some dark leaves there up in the trees. And get a real strong sense of light and shadow. Using a very light touch as well at this stage. And the paper has dried off quite a bit now, so these marks will go on fairly hard edged. not much blending going on now. But it's these few dark marks really that bring everything together. Let's bring that all the way across and then all the way around. Ties the whole painting together really by having these few darks. Okay, I've dried the painting and I think I want to slightly darken this tree on the right hand side. So bring in a little bit of dark paint. Don't want to cover up all that, the little raw sienna area in there. Now I like that, but just a tiny little bit of dark all the way along the right hand side. Let's darken a couple of the branches in there as well. Not too much. Be careful I don't overdo it at this stage. Let's get some more blue, more like red. Let's get that quite dark down towards the base of the tree. Soften that down, just use my finger. Now I think a few little marks now with the calligraphy brush, little bits of grass and twigs and things, whatever it is, it's not really important, it's just a few little marks. So tiny little spritz with the bottle there. And so really I'm just getting some paint on the brush and very lightly dragging it. And I'm creating a few little connections with some darks, little lost and found connections. I want to tie it together left and right with these subtle little marks. Now I could probably get away with not doing it, but I'm looking at the painting, it's a little bit light across the bottom there, so I want to try and cover that up, but without really bringing in a glaze or anything across there. I don't want to get into that. So these few little marks with the brush on its side I think is enough to connect the two sides of the painting together, whilst also adding tiniest little bit of texture in there. So just having a little look around where it looks a tiny bit flat, and that little dark mark over the top of that is enough to almost create a more 3D look to the area. Now it is a little bit busy in the foreground, but it's quite a busy painting anyway with all the trees and the leaves and the foliage, so I think it doesn't overwork, if that makes sense. But anyway, I think I'll leave it alone. I think that's the painting done. Okay, that's the painting finished. So working my way around with the cling film, which is slightly unusual technique, but I really think it works. It creates lots of random little marks that would be fairly difficult to make with a brush. Also, it's fun to do anyway. It's fun to play around with these different ways of working. But anyway, I hope you got something from that. If you did, let me know. Subscribe if you haven't already, and send me a comment and give the video a like and all that kind of stuff. Check me out over on Patreon as well. I've got an exclusive video every week. Got a Facebook group that's fairly new now where we have challenges and discussions and all that kind of good stuff, so you can check that out as well. But anyway, thanks for watching everybody as always, and see you next time.